Welcome everyone to the 2015 Summer Political Risk Analysis class. It's great to be working with you. Now this is the first in a series of video blocks which I intend to do for this semester, just to kind of supplement the information which you have already on Blackboard through the various readings and the units and PowerPoints. So there's a little section here, there's no PowerPoints to this one, but it's intended just to kind of add and to clarify some points and also just kind of illustrate some key events going on at the moment which helps to support the political risk analysis field. So the first thing that I want to touch on when we're talking about current events is that you may well have heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, which is in current negotiation between the US and 11 other countries. So there's a dozen in this overall trade agreement process going on. And it has hit several issues. Now, before the midterm elections last November in the US, it was argued that had the Democrats won the Senate or maintained control of the Senate, that it was probably less likely that the whole trade agreement would be able to get through because of concerns regarding on the Democrat front of jobs, issues regarding jobs. The Republicans took control of the Senate, as we all know, and it was then thought, well, actually, the trade agreement would probably go ahead and proceed with probably real significant opportunities for businesses, both in the US and those in the Pacific Rim countries. However, in the last few days, for May of 2015, you may have seen that there have been some Democrat senators who revolted against the fast-track bill to try and get the partnership agreement to be authorized on a faster process with all the complexities by it. But the vote was lost by a small margin, with Senator Elizabeth Warren being one of the key people leading that vote against the actual agreement. So what we have at the moment is kind of a classic political risk situation whereby companies and countries are wanting to push ahead with this agreement, but then we have a political situation which is impeding this. Anyway, what I want to really touch on is on the issues of the risk analysis part of this course. And what I want you to consider is that each section of the course is like key data points. Okay, so we've got the risk analysis part, which has got the risk perception, communication, and social amplification of risk, which are 3 units, units 2, 3, and 4. And the one thing to keep in mind for this is about the social license to operate. These are the key features of that section. Okay, so while you read through this and not much comes out regarding, okay, well, how does this really bring on to political risk analysis? Well, that behavioral science component was done completely separate to the political risk analysis area, but as asked in the PRA field, it really is valuable because it helps to understand why do countries or why do companies find it difficult to try to talk to their public or their consumers about what may be seen as contentious technologies or ideas. For example, fracking, how we can get fracking done for energy companies. And there's been a lot of resistance in parts of the US and in many parts of Europe, like UK and Germany in particular. And what we're seeing is they don't have a social license to operate in many cases. They don't have the backing of the politicians and the public to really move on with this. And we've seen this with great clarity at the moment, whereby in early 2015, Governor Cuomo of New York State has banned fracking, okay, because of concerns regarding the environmental effects, the pollutions and the societal consequences. Okay, in Virginia, it's been banned until 2017. Okay, that happened quite recently in the last legislative process, and so the energy companies are losing that social license to operate. And when you pull under the hood, what's in this are things we need to understand about risk perception. How do people perceive the risk of fracking? Second, how should we talk about it? How should these companies deal with these? And thirdly, what's called a social amplification of risk framework. How can we actually understand what's driving up the perceived risks and what can we do about reducing the perceived risks? And that can include looking at communication actions, looking at the ripple effects that may occur by people modifying their behaviours that go against fracking or maybe in supportive of it at the end. And so for the risk analysis area, what's really important is to think about what are the key questions it's going to guide you for when you are asked, whether by a company or a government, where it might be, to think about why are we not getting acceptance for this particular technology? Why is there resistance? What's going on here? And you can say, right, I have a series of questions I can ask that can go through this. First of all, what are the risk characteristics behind this? Second, what are the social amplification and attenuation risk elements? What's driving it up? What's driving it down by the media, by the public at large, social media, politicians, general discourse, and how people may be modifying their behaviour and the consequences of that. And so when you talk to those who say, well, what's going on here? You may not necessarily talk about what you did to get to your answer, but what you're going to recommend. Okay, so it's not necessarily about how you got there, but what you're going to recommend. Just another recent examples to touch on these issues. Malaysian Airlines. Okay, back last year, you may recall that the Malaysian Airlines around March of 2015 suddenly disappeared without a trace in Asia. And then in the summer of last year, we had another Malaysian airline aircraft that went down over Ukraine. It was shot down by believed to be pro-Russian separatists. Now, this had an interesting impact because Malaysian Airlines has been suffering a backlash amongst consumers, not wishing to fly on the airline. Why? Because they're concerned that the airline is prone to disasters, even though the actual risk of flying Malaysian Airlines is no worse or even better off than, say, flying by United, British Airways, Air France, whatever it might be. But the perception of risk that Malaysian Airlines is a risk has meant that it has suffered significant financial problems. It had to lay off about 2,000 plus workers a few months ago, flying aircraft which are pretty much empty because of that perceived risk. And one other thing is deep sea oil drilling. Following the oil spill disaster in the Gulf a couple of years ago by BP, we saw risk contamination occurring. Other energy companies found it difficult to get acceptability and regulatory acceptability for them to operate, even though likes of Shell or Exxon and things had nothing to do with what BP did. But still, because they're in that business, we have that halo effect. You're in that same sector, and therefore what happens to BP thinks, well, it could happen to somebody else, even though they may have very different safety standards, maybe even better safety standards. But it comes back to that social license to operate. Okay, have they got the public on board and the politicians? The politicians help to craft regulations, particularly on the local level in the States, for other countries like the UK more the national level. But it's the political establishments where it helps to craft those regulations, and those regulations then say to the companies, this is what you can or can't do, and these are the restrictions that you may have. One other point just to add before finishing here. The Unit 4 mentions about a task of doing a virtual poster board. Okay, well that was actually for when we ran this course last summer. Okay, there isn't a poster board this time round, even though the slide with those 4 columns are actually very interesting to look at to say, what are the questions that we need to ask when dealing with an issue around us? So it's valuable in that respect to keep that in mind. So what we have for you for this semester is kind of a 5-page briefing paper. I'll have one hand up there. And that is designed to think, how can I condense and make it very concise of dealing with a risk issue and how am I going to talk about it. Think about it, how would you maybe developing a brief succinct paper to someone to say, look, okay, what's going on in this area? whether it's mumps, measles, rubella vaccines, people going backlash of that, or even the emerging issue could be a perceived risk, for example, driverless cars. The car sector, car industry is really driving into that big time at the moment. How are they going to deal with those perceived risks, which could then transfer into regulatory actions? Anyway, I've hit about the 10-minute mark, so that's it for this particular video blog. I'll add other things periodically through the rest of the course. Any questions, comments, please do let me know. Email me, even give me a call, or we can Skype, whatever. And I very much look forward to engaging with you all for this next few weeks. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.